Hello everybody, I'm Brainy Diode, and I am back with, a game review, which I don't believe I've ever done a dedicated game review before, so this is new. If you've been following my channel for a while, you may remember that in January of 2020, I made a video ranking every game I played for the first time in 2019. Well, I am planning to do a very similar video for every game I played for the first time in 2020, but holy crap, I played a lot of games last year, both because of a certain current ongoing global crisis, but also because I wound up playing a lot of really short games for some reason. Anyway, this year's version of that video is going to be really long, and I want to talk about all three games in Super Mario 3D All-Stars a bit more in depth. Not like super in depth, but just a bit more than I think the time I would want to allot to each game in that video will allow for. At the same time, I don't want to make that video extremely long, so when the time comes, it'll be nice to have something to point to and say, if you want to know more about what I think of these games, look here. Also, I wrote the script for this while my thoughts on the game were a little bit fresher in my mind, so hopefully that'll make me sound a little bit coherent. Just a little bit. I know I'm already not doing a great job on that front. Also, assuming everything went according to plan, the video you're watching right now, or if you're only listening, the video you would be watching if you were watching, is actual gameplay that I'm playing that I am now able to record with a TV capture card, gifted to me by my wonderful friend Greenwind V, who is also the person who gifted me the headset and microphone that I've been using since the end of the Nier Automata LP. I swear this man is single-handedly funding my entire channel, and I cannot thank him enough for it. Anyway, intros are hard, and it's late November, so it's not late November. I wrote this script in late November, and I'm just kind of reading it now. I even came up with a way in my mind. I'm not cutting this out, I hope you realize that. I even came up with a way in my mind to, edit that line so it didn't say, it's late December. It would say, it's really not been all that long since Christmas, if you think about it, so let's talk about a jolly fat man in red. But no, I just went ahead and read the actual line that I had on the script. Edit your scripts, people! Edit your scripts! I'm keeping that in. Part 1. Super Mario 64. So, I want to start out by saying that while I did play Super Mario 64 DS, this was my first time actually going through the original, so I really don't have any nostalgia for this game at all. I also want to say that I have nothing but respect for how this game revolutionized Super Mario as a series and the 3D platformer as a genre, but judging by that last sentence, you can probably tell where I'm going with this. I don't think Super Mario 64 has aged very well at all. The controls really did not feel tight to me at all, and it was to the point where as soon as I got to Bob-omb Battlefield, I was having difficulty jumping on the first Goomba. By the time I got to the tougher platforming challenges at the end of the game, I was terrified of every jump and every even mildly sloped piece of ground. I understand that the game didn't have a template to work off of, but when you revisit this game after getting used to some of the more recent Mario games, it can get pretty difficult to overlook. That all being said, I think that the first few worlds, at least, are designed around this really well. As concerned as I was when I first booted up the game, I was surprised with how much fun I was having exploring and just playing around in Bob-omb Battlefield, Womp's Fortress, Jolly Roger Bay, Big Boo's Haunt, and to a little bit lesser extent, Lethal Lava Land. But once I started getting into the rest of the basement levels and the upper floors, I definitely found that I was frustrated with the controls a lot more often than not. And I think this might be other people's experience as well, seeing as the ones that I just mentioned definitely seem to be the most iconic levels in the game. Other than Tick-Tock Clock, of course, but I feel like that's iconic for a different reason. Also, I think it's wonderful that for the most part you can get the stars in each level in pretty much any order. And you don't have to get a specific number of stars per level. Although I definitely found myself missing the checkpoints introduced in later 3D Mario games. Checkpoints are definitely harder to incorporate into a more open game like 64, but once again, knowing the improvements that come later can make this game difficult to revisit. There's definitely fun to be had with this game, but it's difficult to recommend a game that I enjoy less than half of. I'm really glad this game exists to pave the way for all the other games in the 3D Mario catalog, and I'm very glad that there are so many people who are able to have such a wonderful time with this game, and I'm very glad that I was able to experience such a significant piece of gaming history, but it's honestly not one I can see myself revisiting too much in the future. Part 2, Super Mario Sunshine. This is the only game in this collection that I was going into almost blind, and is, to be honest, most of the reason I bought it. After a lot of the, we'll say, mixed thoughts I've heard about it online, I was getting a bit concerned, but I'm glad to say I enjoyed my time in this game a lot. The controls were just as, if not more janky as those in Super Mario 64, but I cannot overstate how much having a method of mid-air course correction saved this game for me. Unfortunately, that means that the levels where FLUDD is taken away suffer a bit for it, making them the low point of the game for me. I'm also not a big fan of being required to play all of the first 7 levels of every world. This, of course, means that if you stumble upon a level you don't care for, there's really not much you can do other than suck it up and deal with it. I'm very glad that did not become the standard moving forward. Also, I never really got used to standing in place and using FLUDD. It's just something that felt a little off to me. That said, I think there's a lot to like in this game. Despite what I said earlier about having to get 7 shines in each world being a bit of a bummer, there were way fewer times that I said I wouldn't be playing this level if I didn't have to than I expected. Other than the secret stages, I think Nintendo did a much better job of designing around the jankiness of the controls here than in 64, with particularly difficult platforming relegated almost entirely to those secret stages right up to the end of the game. And like I said, the course correction allowed for by FLUDD was a lifesaver on several occasions. Speaking of FLUDD, while I definitely wouldn't want to see him become a mainstay of the Mario series, he was a very welcome addition to the game that helps this experience stand out a little bit more. Another thing that helps it stand out more is the strict adherence to the tropical theme throughout the entire game, and while I understand why this might be off-putting to some, I think they did a phenomenal job of giving each world a distinct, unique feel while still maintaining that theme. Also, I loved seeing other worlds off in the distance. It wouldn't really make sense for most other 3D Marios, but it's a detail I kind of wish they figured out how to pull off in some of the other games. All in all, after hearing a bunch of negative stuff about this game online, I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed it. In fact, even though Super Mario 64 is definitely the more polished of the two, I found myself enjoying Sunshine more. Now, I know that a lot of people's complaints with Sunshine come with trying to 100% the game, and while I don't really want to do that, kind of want to try the pachinko level just to see how truly terrible it actually is. Wish me luck. If what I've heard is to be believed, I'm going to need it. Part 3. Super Mario Galaxy. So, earlier I mentioned that I really don't have any nostalgia for Super Mario 64, but if you want to talk about nostalgic, this is definitely it for me. Other than Wii Sports, Super Mario Galaxy was the first console game I ever owned, and is to this day one of only 3 games I've ever completed to 100%. One of the others being Super Mario Galaxy 2. I've been dreaming of playing a Galaxy game on the handheld since I was a kid, so even though this wasn't the new, unique Galaxy sequel that I was hoping for in those dreams, revisiting it on the Switch was an absolute joy. My opinion here is obviously colored by personal experience, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't, but Galaxy is undoubtedly my favorite game in this collection, and by a fairly sizable margin. This is undoubtedly the start of the series' switch to more linear 3D Mario games that wouldn't be challenged for about a decade after its release, and there are definitely arguments to be made that the galaxies in this game tend to be less memorable and iconic than the worlds of 64 and Sunshine, in part because there are a lot more of them, so new ideas get introduced and discarded much faster than in the previous games. This means that if you don't like a specific galaxy or gameplay idea, you can be done with it quickly or skip over it entirely much more easily, but it also means that you don't get very much time at all to play around with the ideas that you really do like. There are definitely advantages and disadvantages to this new format, and I'll leave it as an exercise for the watcher which outweighs the other. But when playing this game in the collection, I found myself powering through all 120 stars without really even thinking about it, and there were only a handful of levels I found genuinely frustrating while doing so. I think this is because, putting all possible complaints about the level design aside, this game just feels really good to play. I feel a little bad for complaining about Super Mario 64's controls so much, and I have to admit that the wide range of moves Mario has available to him can be a lot of fun to play around with. However, in Galaxy, nearly every single one of those moves is back, but they feel so much more precise this time. Mario moved exactly how I expected him to almost all the time, and that made pretty much every death feel like my fault as opposed to an unexpected misstep or a slope that was steeper than I thought it was in 64 Sunshine. However, deaths are in general a lot less frequent in this one, both because of those tighter controls and because the game just tends to be easier. I'm not someone who goes out of my way to play hard games or even cares for them all that much, so that isn't a point against the game for me, but I can understand how it would be for some. Unfortunately, it wasn't until Galaxy 2 that 3D Mario started its trend of ultra-hard bonus levels, so any great deal of difficulty here will have to be in some sort of challenge you impose on yourself. Still, playing this game has reminded me just what a phenomenal experience it is, and how much better it has aged than 64 or Sunshine. Conclusion. My thoughts on the collection as a whole. In the period from this collection's announcement to about a week after its release, there was a fair amount of controversy about whether Super Mario 3D All-Stars does enough to justify the $60 price tag. After all, it really hasn't been that long since we got the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy and the Spyro Reignited trilogy, both of which were full HD remakes of their respective games. By contrast, Super Mario 3D All-Stars basically raises the resolution and lets you listen to the soundtracks outside of the games, and doesn't really do much else. While I can definitely agree while I can definitely see where these complaints are coming from, I personally have to agree with the sentiment that I've seen elsewhere on the internet that Mario is just a bigger name than Crash or Spyro. Could Nintendo have done more with this collection? Absolutely. Did they have to? Personally, I don't really think so. There's also the issue of its limited release, and while I usually like to defend Nintendo for a lot of stuff, this one is one thing that I'll agree is pretty unfriendly to customers. Not cool, Nintendo. I'm also a little bummed out that Galaxy 2 is missing, especially since I think I've actually come to enjoy that one a little bit more than the original Galaxy. But that game had an even stronger focus on motion controls, so I'm not sure the transition to Switch would have treated it too well. I've seen people suggest the possibility of Galaxy 2 coming to 3D All-Stars as a piece of DLC, and if that does happen, you can bet I'll buy it. But until then, it does feel like there's a little bit of a hole in the collection that Galaxy 2 could have just slipped right in and filled. And I've been considering going back and playing that game on my Wii lately, and it's just reminding me how much more convenient it would be to just have it available on my Switch so I can play it on my Switch. Nintendo, please release Galaxy 2 as DLC. But I digress. Ultimately, if you're someone who still has working copies and systems for these three games that you don't mind pulling out and hooking back up, this collection doesn't really have that much to offer you, so you're probably safe to skip it. On the other hand, if you're someone who's been looking for a chance to play these classics on newer hardware, and especially on a handheld, or if, like me, you're a younger or newer fan who never got the chance to experience the originals and are interested in this part of gaming history, I think Super Mario 3D All-Stars is absolutely worth it. Chances are you'll have a lot of fun.